on the screen. We have actually two of the most remarkable public servants I've had the privilege of working with since I've been at Kresge. Nicole Sherrod-Freeman is the Workforce Development Director. Her title is Jobs, Economy, and Detroit at Work Special Advisor. Nikolai Vitti, thank you. Oh. Nikolai Vitti is the absolute remarkable superintendent of the Detroit Public Schools Community District. We are beyond fortunate to have Nikolai in our midst. And so maybe picking up on what Gene just said, let me start, Nicole, with you, if you don't mind. The mayor has articulated, and the city council has articulated probably what, 12, 14 different priorities for the expenditure of the federal dollars. How's it going? It's a big job.
Yeah, it's a big job, long way to go. So I lead economic development and workforce development for the city. And I will say a couple of things. First, the mayor spent a lot of time early on engaging the community and driving us as cabinet to engage the community. He started with 6 priorities, in fact. And by the time we were done with our 60 community engagement meetings over the course of about 28 days, we'd shifted to the 15 appropriations that we took to council. And I will say, much of what we're focusing on is exactly what you and Gene were just talking about. We're going door to door. Part of the work that you're enabling through Kresge Foundation is literally door knocking to be sure that we are A, getting input, and B, being sure that what's available is known to the public so they can take advantage of it.
How do you deliver against 14 sort of broad sweeping priorities, all of which are pretty well resourced by the federal government?
Well, it started with the mayor's vision, and then his direction to us: don't bring me a single strategy. So we spent enormous amounts of time on the front end. Once we knew what the ARPA appropriation would be, we spent an enormous amount of time as an administration really functioning more like what you see in the corporate sector. And by that, I mean taking the vision, breaking it down into, what does that mean across the administration? What will that mean to the community? And then crosswalking and weaving together a strategy that is, at least our consulting partners tell us, unlike what they're seeing elsewhere in the country. There is no single silver bullet to the challenges we're facing, and so there can be no single simple strategy. We've got to weave it together.
And Gene talked a little bit about the need to sort of spread, both logistically and because that's the way the federal government is going to flow these monies over a couple of years. I mean, so I assume that this infrastructure kind of gets built sort of through accretion almost.
Yeah, that's right. So recognizing that we have a very limited amount of time to deploy and leverage the funding, our plans really start with the issues we can help Detroiters solve most immediately, mid-range challenges, so helping enabling systems that can weave together solutions over the time, but all building toward this trajectory of when the money's gone, we need to have left behind a city that is markedly better across neighborhood investments and housing and public safety, jobs, the economy, the digital divide, so many dimensions. Things need to be markedly better on the other side of that funding than they are now.
Nikolai, is there an analog at the schools? I mean, how do you think about sort of this balance between short-term, mid-term, and long-term build?
Well, we have been very disciplined, I would say, over the last 4 or 5 years about rebuilding the district to give our employees and students, families what they need, but being fiscally responsible in doing that. And that's why the district was freed of the oversight of the Finance Review Commission at the state level through the work that I've been able to do with the empowered elected board. So when we received this funding, it was very intentional with a focus of bringing students back to school. We know that through this pandemic, 70% of our students have been chronically absent, so missing 18 or more days online or in person. Obviously, we've seen learning loss. So as we approach this year in the post-vaccine era of this pandemic, it was maximizing these dollars to bring students back to school. And so part of the dollars, so I think about short, mid, long, Short term, it was investing in the safety strategies that we know that work to prevent the spread of COVID. So PPE, temperature check, symptom check, a nurse in every school, testing. We do weekly testing for all of our employees and our students, incentivizing the vaccine, home visits. That's been very effective to bring students back to school that are not going to be contacted through phone calls or robocalls and text messages. Short term and then when we think mid-term investments or mid-range investments is doing the things that we've always known we should do, but didn't have the funding to do. So mental health support, providing tier 2 and tier 3, so one-on-one small group mental health support, going deeper with one-to-one small group reading intervention and math intervention, expanding summer school. We had 10,000 students attend summer school this past summer, which was about academics, course recovery, but also enrichment, art, music, all of which we would not be able to fund without these dollars. And then when we think long-term, it's about the facilities. So we have about 4 years ago, we did an audit to demonstrate by 2023, we would need $1.5 billion to invest in infrastructure, which on average, when you look at our schools are 66 years old on average. You can imagine the amount of investment that's needed in those buildings, not only because of the age, but because of the tragedy that was emergency management and the lack of investment that happened in the school district over 2 decades. So I would say $600 to $800 million will be over the next, I would say 5 to 7 years, be invested in our facilities, which will put a major dent into that, and which prevents us from having to tax Detroiters once again to fix an infrastructure challenge.
Can I push on that just a little bit? I mean, the complexity of taking across your entire district that many facilities with all of the different needs they have, it's just got to be unbelievably complicated. And I do know that you've called on our private sector here in Detroit to help. Can you say just a word about how you, maybe both of you, sort of draw in sectors beyond your own to help make this money go even further?
Well, the district, when we think about the operations department, it has not been developed to do that amount of work. We haven't had those kind of resources in years. So we have a great small team, but that small team is not equipped to do the kind of project management and oversight that has to happen in all of these buildings, from HVAC work to roof repairs, and even a couple new construction opportunities. So we are partnering with the business sector. Many companies have stepped up to just help us offer some individuals to work pro bono on managing some of these contracts, problem solving the procurement process so we can expedite that, making sure that we're not overpriced, things are being done on time. And that's all of our commitment throughout the next 5 to 7 years. And we hope that will continue to gain credibility to the district. So if we need to get to that finish line to finish all of the projects and we have to go out to Detroiters for another bond in the future, this work over the next 5 to 7 years will build the credibility that's needed to then to try to do something locally.
I've got to believe, Gene, that those kind of proof points are going to be really important to the administration, just to be able to say these monies were well spent. Not every dollar can be perfectly spent, but we've got a lot of good examples in Detroit and elsewhere of how this money can move over the longer term.
No, look, there's no question when I'm called to discuss, where things are going well, we're often giving, pointing them to things that Mayor Duggan is doing. And, the interesting thing, just, you're talking about my personal connection, every time I've been to Detroit last 30 years, I'd always do a shout out to my younger brother for being the founder and director of the Mosaic Youth Theater Group. But, when he turned that over to one of his alumni, who's doing an amazing job, she is, he started working with the Children Foundation and with the superintendent on how you make that not just for Mosaic Youth Theater, but to make it more systemic in the Detroit schools. And that kind of focus or realization to me of the importance of we all know, Reverend Jesse Jackson used to talk about this, we talk so much about the classroom, but for a lot of us, what motivated you? what made you learn to be on time, to be excellent, to work hard, practice. It was often that passion, and to, try to do that systemically. But it also meant that even before I took this job, I was paying attention to the Detroit public schools, maybe a little more with that personal connection. And I think there's just been such an enormous commitment to the equity, and it makes me so, when you see somebody as committed as the superintendent is, and then to be able to give them the funds. And then I also just have to say on the nuts and bolts, for all the things there was a nuts and bolts aspect to the K through 12 money in the American Rescue Plan. And that was that you would use money to allow kids to come back to school face to face, without putting the children at risk, without putting the teachers at risk, without putting the grandparents of the children at risk. And, as you can know, you've all read some of the frustrations. You have one state, Arizona, that's only giving grants if you don't require masks. You can't get money unless you are not, you are kind of essentially anti-mask. So we have that. So to see Detroit, where in addition to the learning loss, in addition to doubling the number of kids in the summer schools, to see the focus there. I mean, that may seem like the kind of nuts and bolts of implementation, but it's life-saving, and it's preventing future learning loss, and it's preventing. So, I really do, compliment you both on, I know you're doing long-term vision, but realizing that. And just one last thing I'd mention, this home visit. One thing President Biden wants me to do is he always wants me to talk to governors and mayors directly. So I've talked to about 35, 40 governors directly. One of the things I hear constantly is, we don't know what's happening to certain kids. They haven't showed up. We don't know what's happened. Is there a problem? Are they a victim of domestic abuse? They just don't even know. And of course, what happens is low-income families can fall into a situation where they don't even have a working phone, or they're moving. And so it's just like, oh, there's nothing we can do. So to see this home visit program that I know existed before the American Rescue Plan came, but to see you using it more, that to me is a kind of model I think that, we would talk to other places about replicating.
Well, and that's so interesting, Nicole. I mean, is there some way that these two systems can connect? I mean, you guys do employment training, you do health-related work. These guys can't completely reach kids after they leave the school grounds. I mean, is there some way to break down the silos?
Yes, that's a great question. And in fact, there is, and it's already underway. So part of what the American Rescue Plan Act funding has enabled is a more formal, not completely formalized, but certainly the beginnings of a formal partnership between the Community Health Corps, which is the work that in part the foundation enables, and we are anticipating using a good deal of the American Rescue Plan Act funding to support. But that's the initiative that the mayor stood up with Deputy Mayor Conrad Mallett under Detroit at Work a couple of, now it's been nearly a year, where we are going door to door, knocking the doors of those our neighbors and friends who are most deeply disconnected, who don't have a phone, have no idea that they are eligible for public benefits, or are deathly afraid that if they apply for a new benefit, it will disrupt their existing benefit, who have no way, who have no way of working through, the dramatically improved Department of Health and Human Services application for benefits, but even so, for so many, it's still undecipherable. And so what we are doing is partnering with Dr. Vidi's program across a number of schools, if not in all of the feeder schools into high schools, that is community health worker oriented. We have a community health corps program. You've got community healthcare workers. And what we're finding is when we go into many of those homes, there are young people, there are children who have fallen out of the system. And so we're formalizing the system that says, we just found 3 kids that you may be looking for. Let's connect and figure out what makes sense.
Well, it seems too, Dr. Viti, that one of the geniuses of what the administration has done and what this local administration has done is to recognize that schools don't sit in isolation. They sit in neighborhoods, right? And so the mayor has got set aside for open space, for transportation, for early childhood development. I mean, I assume that there's just gotta be a sort of a meeting of the minds around what it means to have a school hold community in place and have the community hold the school in place.
Absolutely, and just to put a period at the end of the sentence about bringing kids back to school. So we're still about ending maybe the third week of school. 98% of our students are back in school, and the other 2% are online because we created a virtual school for those families who just still aren't comfortable or outstanding medical situations. And again, I've been doing this work 20 years, always in large urban school districts. I have never seen equitable funding. And so although it's a 2-year, maybe a 3-year, funding stream, it is equitable funding for 2 to 3 years. And I look forward to doing things differently. Always wanted to do around mental health, around academic interventions, even technology, and show those results, the impact based on the inputs. And then talk to the state legislature about see what happens when we're equitably funded, the kind of depths that we can get to with a whole child to address then the academic issues. But absolutely, to your other point, our work has been to try to rebuild feeder patterns and neighborhood schools, which was all decimated with closing of schools and a random, disengaged community and an imposed process of closing schools. So I think part of this redevelopment, if you will, of the city has to be about neighborhood schools as well. And so clear feeder patterns from pre-K all the way to 12th grade. That's the work that Mary Grove is also about, at least, in that section of town, to create a, cradle to college kind of continuum at Mary Grove, but expand that through every neighborhood so that you can envision sending your child to that elementary school pre-K, expanding that pre-K opportunity all the way to 12th grade and then beyond. So part of the integration also in the home visit process is talking about the child's credit opportunity as well. So when our folks are actually knocking on doors, reminding them that school's open, or talking about the virtual school, we're also promoting that as well as part of those home visits. This past summer, we did 30,000 home visits. Wow. And that's one of the reasons why we have such a large number of students coming back, because again, you can't rely on the normal traditional ways of communication.
Yeah, that is really terrific. And I often get asked when I'm doing the conversations, you really do from governor mayors, what else are you hearing? I mean, this is something I would promote. And I will tell you, obviously right now as we speak, my colleagues back in DC are, I just was in our White House morning meeting before, and if we can pass that Build Back Better reconciliation plan, then you're talking about more pre-K, more Title I funding that will be even longer and would empower him to even have a longer term vision planning for this. So American Rescue Plan was a very, very important part one, but the full Build Back Better plan is just what it is. It's a chance to not just build back, but build back to doing these kind of better policies and making a lot of certain things are just crisis. Maybe sending someone a check is a crisis, but you see a lot of these things. They're not just 1-year things. They're things that would break your heart if you started and you dropped off afterwards.
All right. Well, on that note of aspiration and hope, thank you all. Just remarkable public servants each. We can't tell you how much Detroit is in your debt. So thank you all for the time and for your work. Thank you.